is complete. Viva Mexico's first undisputed champion. All hail the king.
Mexico is a country of colorful culture, tacos, and sombreros. The image of the original inhabitants of the country and traditions are firmly rooted in the minds of people, but behind the screen of the above features hides a lot of problems. Poverty and crime make the life of the people really difficult. In such conditions are born tough and harsh guys who need an opportunity to spill out a part of aggression, with what boxing helps. Historically, Mexico provides a huge number of skillful boxers to the sport. Just think of Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., Marco Antonio Barrera, and Erik Morales. This list can go on forever. And also, this list will soon be updated with one more legend. The legacy of Mexican star and all-time super middleweight champion Saul Canelo Alvarez is being built at this exact moment. He began his boxing career at the age of 15, cruised through several weight classes, and became the #1 ranked P4P fighter. Soon, he will face the undisputed light middleweight world champion Jermell Charlo. On this occasion, we decided to dive into the history of the great knockout artist, starting from his first steps into this world to the undisputed championship. Make yourself comfortable and get ready to watch. You're on the Boxing Blitz channel. Let's go. The beginning of the journey. The future star was born on July 18, 1990 in the city of Guadalajara, in the Mexican city of Jalisco, and became the 8th child in the family. He received the nickname Canelo when he was still a child. It is a common designation for children with red hair and means cinnamon. The fighter looks more like an Irishman, just like his mom. And according to the boxer himself, he may have Irish roots somewhere in his roots, having fought on the side of Mexico in the U.S.-Mexican War from 1846 to 1848. When the boy was 5 years old, the family moved to Guanacatlán to a farm. From childhood, Saul was used to work and horseback riding. Many of his brothers started boxing from a young age, and one of them even became the interim WBA champion. After seeing the impressive performance of one of his brothers, he decided to sign up for boxing at the age of 13. In Mexico, boxing is the most basic sport that kids go to, often out of need for money. Mexican boxing technique is characterized by a heavy emphasis on punching power, and dirty boxing is often practiced, but it is effective, since many boxers move into professional boxing early on in search of income. As an amateur, Saul was a silver medalist at the Junior Championships and took gold at the age of 15 at the Mexican Championships. His record was 44 wins and 2 losses, with only 12 wins by knockout. The fighter's coaches could not find opponents at the amateur level, which led to the decision to move to the pros. Professional career. At the age of 15, Saul stepped into the professional ring. His first fights were in his home country against not the most impressive opposition. In the first 15 fights, Saul won 11 times by knockout, and 1 time brought the fight to a draw. Among these wins was a split decision against Miguel Vazquez, the future IBF lightweight champion. In his first fights, he already showed the characteristics that will make him world famous in the future. Many opponents at that stage of his career had negative records or had lost many of their last fights. Saul only came out to good opposition in his 19th fight. In April 2008, Canelo fought for his first WBA Feta Centro welterweight title. He successfully pressured his opponent and moved around the ring like a pro. He punched like a grown man at 17 and delivered lots of flashy combinations. The fight ended after the 11th round, when his opponent was unable to continue after a heavy beating. By the way, during the period, Canelo became a father for the first time. His girlfriend Karen got pregnant when the boxer was only 16. They tried to live together, but a happy family life was only happy in the movies, and soon the couple broke up. Although the Mexican continues to maintain contact with the child. The victory march continued. Along the way, Saul faced Miguel Vasquez again to close out the first controversial win. This time, he picked up a unanimous decision victory. But that's not all the tournament was memorable for. Canelo's family had 7 sons, and they all made appearances in this card, though not all of them were able to win. Later, Saul defended the WBA Fede Centro title several times, became the champion of several other versions of the NABO, WBO Latino, and WBC Youth. By the 34th fight in his professional career, the Mexican reached the WBC silver belt. His opponent was Luciano Leonel Coelho, with a record of 26-1. Becoming the champion of this version, there were only a couple of steps to the full WBC title. Saul decided to make everything as beautiful as possible and establish dominance from the first round. The Mexican landed the first knockdown of the fight with a brutal left side blow. It's amazing how his opponent got up, but even a blow of such force did not set his mind right, and in the next round, Coelho was on the floor again. At the end of the 5th round, he checked his liver function, and in the 6th round, he left no way for his opponent to win and knocked him out. In late 2010, Alvarez came out to defend his WBC silver title against former WBC champion Carlos Manuel Baldemir. There was an astronomical age difference of 19 years between the boxers, but nevertheless, the Argentinian had impressive experience and a more prestigious record. The fight was almost cancelled because the opponent failed the weigh-in, but Saul still accepted the fight and refused to accept 20% of the opponent's fee. The opponent tried his best to deliver a heavy punch, but the Mexican was faster and more accurate in combinations. The Rocky Balboa-style confrontation didn't last long, and already in the 6th round, Alvarez landed a hard series of punches and after a short pause, sent the veteran to play with his grandchildren in retirement. He made another title defense against Lovemore Ndao, winning each of the 12 rounds. Saul became the mandatory challenger for the WBC welterweight title. But first, boxing legend Manny Pacquiao and Antonio Margarito fought it out. Pac-Man took a sure unanimous decision, but later said he had no intention of defending his belt. The title became vacant and was eventually put on the line for a fight between Canelo and Matthew Hatton. The opponent proved to be no match for the red-headed knockout artist and lost every round. The Mexican spoiled his own score a bit when he threw a punch after the gong in the 7th round. He was taken off a point for that, but it meant nothing to the score. That day, Saul became world champion for the first time, but he was still not considered a big figure in boxing. His opponents either had no big accomplishments or were past their peak, but the Mexican did not hesitate and thoroughly set about rectifying the situation. Canelo started actively defending the title. He made 2 successful defenses against mid-level opponents, and in the 3rd defense, the challenger was former IBF champion Kermit Cintron, a serious opponent for Canelo. The young Mexican skillfully coped with more experienced and older men, showing the brightest example of generational change in boxing. Punches flew with the speed of a bullet, combinations flew in reliably like a Swiss watch, and their power made his legs shake like twigs during the wind. In the 4th round, Saul scored a knockdown, and in the 5th round, he finished what he had started, getting another knockout in his collection. After 3 title defenses, Alvarez was awarded a fight with the most famous opponent of his professional career. Shane Mosley is a multiple-time world champion in various versions, a participant in the iconic fights with Manny Pacquiao and Oscar de la Hoya, and one of the major stars of the past generation. Victory over such an opponent would bring a fat paycheck, universal recognition, and great fame, which the young boxer aspired to. The bout began, and at first the veteran showed himself well. His experience helped to take the opening segment, but as time went on, young Canelo began to take away the advantage. The Mexican was dismantling Mosley beautifully, scoring combinations on the body and showing beautiful defense against punches. The opponent was tough and withstood all the hits of the young puncher. Canelo took a confident decision of the judges and instantly became recognizable in wide circles. At the age of 22, the boxer began dating a woman who was 18 years older than him, but this relationship did not last long. The taste of fame did not reduce the level of discipline of the fighter, and he continued to perform successfully. In the 5th title defense, the opponent was supposed to be Paul Williams. However, there was an accident. The boxer got into an accident on his motorcycle and was paralyzed below the waist due to a spinal injury. Saul could not ignore the news and wished the fighter a speedy recovery, re-inviting him to his next fight with his family. The question of the next opponent came up. The most likely opponent was Victor Ortiz, who was going to fight the champion after a warm-up fight with Josecito Lopez. However, unexpectedly for many, Lopez was to shock the boxing world. The Mexican did not shy away from fighting a little-known opponent and rolled over to Josecito. Saul scored several knockdowns and ended the fight in the 5th round. The victory over Lopez was the 5th defense of the WBC title. After that, it was decided to arrange a unification fight against WBA champion Austin Trout. The future opponent had a clean record of 26-0, 4 title defenses, and in his last fight, he defeated Miguel Gato. This was the Mexican's most serious opponent at the time. The Mexican prepared well for the fight and applied the necessary strategy to the heavy-hitting Mexican. He worked skillfully at long range, throwing out jabs and body punches. Saul wasn't always able to close the distance, which left the rounds in Trout's favor. Alvarez tried to interrupt his opponent's slow-paced style of fighting, but his punches went nowhere. The first half of the meeting was not successful, but after the red-headed knockout artist gathered his strength and turned the course of the fight, the fighters began to fight more often at close range. Saul was successful in such conditions and outboxed his opponent in every exchange. At the very beginning of the 7th round, he scored a knockdown with a right jab and consolidated the advantage. The fight continued in an equal manner and went to a judge's decision. The fight was very close, but the judges were to pick the young Mexican as the winner. It cannot be said that the judges often gave some rounds to the Mexican when he did not deserve it, but the victory of the boxer still did not cause much controversy. Alvarez became the champion of 2 versions and took the vacant ring belt as a bonus. The biggest challenge of the Mexican's career came after that fight, and not only in terms of skills, but also in terms of media component and the greatness of his opponent. It was the great Floyd Mayweather Jr. For a long time, the fighters could not come to a common agreement due to the terms of contracts and the deal. Eventually, everything was resolved, and it was decided to hold the fight in the interim weight class up to 152 pounds. Mayweather was ranked number 1 in the P4P rankings and held the welterweight belt. On the line for the fight were the WBC and the ring belts at super middleweight and the WBA super welterweight belt. On the day of the fight, Alvarez was 15 pounds heavier, making a big bet on a knockout, but Floyd proved to be a real kryptonite for the Mexican. In this fight, the huge punching power was completely wiped out, his pressure lost weight, and the dodges just didn't work against the speedy Mayweather. Mayweather's experience and skills made Saul an amateur in front of millions of spectators. He would not do anything to the great boxer and gave the vast majority of the rounds. But not all the judges agreed with that. Judge C.J. Ross counted 114 to 114 and then resigned under public pressure. Other results were also controversial, though there was no way the Mexican could have taken that many rounds. In that fight, Floyd Money Mayweather made $41.5 million when Saul only made $5 million. The fight became one of the highest-grossing fights in boxing history, gathering over 2 million pay-per-views. But it wasn't just boxers and promoters who made money from this fight. The Mexican's girlfriend, Cynthia Rodriguez, bet that night a round sum of money, but not on her companion, but on his opponent. There is no better way to leave nicely. Alvarez lost titles, but not championship ambition. In March 2014, Canelo knocked out Alfredo Angulo, and 4 months later fought interim WBA champion Erislandy Lara. His opponent showed a more competitive fight than many expected. He skillfully bombarded the Mexican at range and annoyed him with combinations. Canelo won by split decision. Saul continued his match, and after a knockout against James Kirkland, finally stepped up for another title fight. In November 2015, he fought against dangerous multi-time, multi-version champion Miguel Gato for the vacant WBC middleweight title, although the fighters had agreed to an interim weight of 155 pounds. Once again, Alvarez took the fight to a decision, but did it with much more confidence than before. Gato relied on the movements and speed, while the Mexican relied more on precision and power. At the end of the fight, Alvarez outscored his opponent in the number of punches and their quality and took a solid unanimous decision. Afterwards, he accepted the challenge of the representative of England, Amir Khan, as a title defense. He lost the first 3 rounds due to his opponent's movements and combinations, and in round 4, the Mexican found his approach and began to crush the challenger, ending the night in round 6 with a hard right blow. The punch was so hard that his opponent fell to the ground senseless, looking up at the spotlights. In September 2016, he returned to the light middleweight for a title fight. The opponent was the British Liam Smith, who held the WBO belt. The red-haired knockout artist established a Mexican dictatorship from the first round and with particular zeal beat all the crap out of his opponent. Often, Liam was simply blocking and taking punches from his more powerful opponent. This course of fighting continued for several rounds until Alvarez increased the pace, sending his opponent to a knockdown in round 7. Smith clamped Alvarez at the ropes and began to land a series of punches, but as soon as he paused briefly, the Mexican delivered a left blow to the liver and a right to the head. The opponent got up, but here's the trouble: he doesn't learn from his mistakes. In round 9, his liver was attacked again, and this time Smith was unable to get up. A meaningful win and Alvarez's last performance at light middleweight. Already at that time, there were discussions about a middleweight fight with Gennady Golovkin, but before that, Canelo decided to fight in the interim 164.5 pounds against Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., former WBC middleweight champion and the son of another legendary Mexican boxer. Unfortunately, his opponent was unable to show a good performance and lost each of the 12 rounds. In September 2016, Saul Alvarez finally faced off against perennial middleweight champion Gennady Golovkin. In terms of his regalia and achievements in the sport against other opponents of the Mexican, Golovkin was inferior only to Mayweather. The Kazakh fighter had defended his titles 17 times and had a middleweight record for the number of knockouts. At stake were the belts of WBA, WBC, IBF, IBO, and the Ring. The fight was heavily discussed by the public and experts. There were many questions under the terms of the contract. Alvarez, in case of a loss, had the opportunity for a rematch, although Golovkin was deprived of such an option in case of defeat. The champion himself called the fight with the Mexican the toughest of his career. Saul was able to make a quality move up in weight class and gain the necessary muscle mass. It was a confrontation of two knockout artists, but in this fight, everything was decided by skill and experience. It was all Golovkin's side for 12 rounds, and the boxers exchanged punches, crushed each other with heavy punches, pressed, and suffered damage. Each delivered as much damage as they could offer, and their stone jaws continued to stand. In the first rounds, Alvarez was active and showed well against the champion, but from the third, Golovkin became more active and found his pace. He outboxed the Mexican, outpaced him in the number and quality of punches. Surprisingly, but with all the heavy punches from both fighters, none of them fell into a knockdown. Everything was going to the Kazakh's victory, but was the surprise of the audience when the judges gave a draw by split decision. The decision caused a lot of controversy, and the judge, Adelina Bird, who gave the victory to Canelo with the score of 118 to 110, was called the worst judge in history. Oscar De La Hoya himself, Alvarez's promoter, stated that his fighter lost. However, Gennady did not lose anything because of that. In the eyes of the fans, he became the one who won, and according to Sports Observer's estimates, he earned 3 times as much for just one fight as he did in all of his past fights combined. An immediate rematch was announced. However, difficulties arose, and the second meeting took place only a year later with the IBF belt at stake. During this time, Golovkin managed to knock out one more opponent. Alvarez solved his problems and came out of the second fight in better shape than the first time. He managed to put on a more competitive fight and showed himself better at the distance. Although the fight was extremely competitive, but the Mexican won by majority decision. The controversy about the results of the fight arose again, but not as strong as the first time. Over time, opinions were divided, but in the history of boxing, there was only one winner, and that was Alvarez. It was the biggest win of the boxer's career, but he didn't stop and went forward. In the next fight, the boxer made his debut in the super middleweight for the WBA regular title against Rocky Fielding. Alvarez left no chance for his opponent and sent him to the knockdowns in the first, second, and third rounds, finishing the fight in the third segment. But the middleweight story wasn't over. Canelo went down for a unification fight for the WBA Super, WBC, and IBF titles against Daniel Jacobs. The start of the fight was anchored by Alvarez's active work. He pressured and attacked a lot, forcing his opponent to retreat. In the second half of the fight, Jacobs became more active against the tired Mexican and took control of the fight. Saul took the initiative towards the end of the fight and took the necessary rounds to win. Canelo won by unanimous decision and finally retired from middleweight. But even here, Saul surprised the audience. He moved up not to the super middleweight division, but straight to light heavyweight for the fight against Sergey Kovalev. At the time of the meeting, the Crusher was not in optimal condition and had a 4-3 record in his last 7 fights. Sergey once held the WBA Super, WBO, and IBF belts, but in the fight with Alvarez, the WBO title was on the line. Sergey was able to impose his will on his small-sized opponent and outbox him for most of the rounds. Due to the difference in size and power, he time after time caused problems for the Mexican, but he managed to take the victory. In the 11th round, he pressured his tired opponent, staggered him with the left side blow, and knocked him out with the right cross. Thus, Alvarez became the champion in the 4th weight class for himself. The Mexican forgot about the light heavyweight division for a while, but only to win the absolute throne in the super middleweight division. But before that, on November 6, 2020, Saul terminated his contract with Golden Boy Promotions due to contractual violations. After signing a new deal with DAZN, Saul faced undefeated WBA champion Callum Smith, where his opponent belt and the vacant WBC title were on the line. This was the most worthy opponent an offer at super middleweight, and the Mexican performed well in this fight. He scored a solid unanimous decision, outboxing his opponent in most rounds. After becoming the champion, he intended to go on for the belt, but he was obliged to defend the belt against the mandatory challenger Avni Yildirim, who had not fought for 2 years, and in his last fight, he lost, albeit in a controversial manner. An easy opponent for the Mexican, but a necessary one to keep the belt. The Turkish boxer was on the floor in the 1st and 2nd rounds, and after the 3rd round, he was unable to continue the fight. In May 2021, Alvarez's opponent was British Billy Joe Saunders, who held the WBO belt with 2 defenses. Initially, the opponent was supposed to be Caleb Plant, who, according to many, was supposed to give the biggest fight to the Mexican. Saunders presented the fight as a brains versus muscle confrontation, but the intelligence let him down. On top of that, the fight took place in Texas with a huge Mexican fan base and 73,000 spectators in the arena. At first, the fight was going the way Saunders wanted it to, a slow pace with plenty of jabs against Alvarez's infrequent but powerful attacks. The fight continued in this fashion for a long time until the Mexican picked up the pace in the 8th round. Canelo beat his opponent badly and caused problems to his opponent's eye. At the break between the rounds, doctors came into the ring and ruled that Saunders was unable to continue the fight. There was only 1 belt left for the complete package. In November of the same year, there was a unification fight for the status of the first undisputed world champion in the super middleweight division. Caleb Plant owned the IBF belt and defended it 3 times. He was a technical boxer who could cause real problems for his opponent. At the press conference, the fighters misunderstood each other because of a language barrier and got into a fight. The tense atmosphere did not break Canelo's iron attitude. During the fight itself, Canelo caused some problems in the first half of the fight. He was fast and technical in his attacks. Saul waited out the initial storm and picked up the pace when his opponent drained all of his cardio. The result was a crushing knockout in the 11th round. After the victory, the fighters had a heart-to-heart talk and paid respect to each other. It took Alvarez just 1 year to reach the status of king of the weight class. The title of the undisputed champion was followed by the status of number 1 P for P. In the moment, Canelo became the most famous boxer and acquired an aura of invincibility. The super middleweight became ideal for him, where the fighter was able to break every opponent. But the thirst for conquest blazed in the fighter the brightest flame. On the wave of success, the boxer decided to move up to the light heavyweight and fight for the WBO belt against Russian Dmitry Bivol. Alvarez was a big favorite before the fight, but the Russian simply chose the perfect plan for the Mexican. The Mexican failed to reveal himself to the fullest, lost by the number of punches, and was under a huge pressure of a more skillful opponent. Canelo lost by unanimous decision and returned to his native weight class. The first opponent after his return was an old familiar opponent, with whom it was necessary to close the story. Gennady Golovkin moved up in weight class for the 3rd fight with the Mexican. At the time of the fight, he was already 40 years old, but it did not diminish the intrigue, because the previous meetings were extremely competitive. In the 3rd fight, the Mexican was able to close the story with the Kazakh without question and took a confident unanimous decision, although at the expense of youth and size difference. And Alvarez's last fight now is against Britt John Ryder, a long-time top of the weight class who finally earned the right to fight for the title. Unfortunately, Ryder missed the chance of a lifetime and lost by a crushing decision after being knocked down. And after the fight, a video emerged where the consequences of the terrifying power of Canelo can clearly be seen. As of today, he is preparing for his title defense against Jermell Charlo. You can argue as much as you want about not the best judging about the current opponents, but you can't deny one thing. Saul Alvarez is the most colorful and successful boxer of Mexican descent in the history of the sport. His career isn't over yet, but he continues to keep himself in shape and make history. Let's keep following him further, and on that note, I say bye to you. Write in the comments your thoughts on Saul Alvarez, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel.